Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. I'm One Man Tea Party, and today I'm feeling a little melancholic. See, I recently finished reading the Wheel of Time series. 15 books long and easily one of my favorite stories now. Robert Jordan, the author, died before finishing the series, with Brandon Sanderson finishing it off. While the books that Sanderson wrote are fantastic, there's a sense of wrongness that I couldn't shake. It's not that I don't think Sanderson shouldn't have finished the series. There's something that I can't quite put my finger on that feels wrong about the whole thing. Robert Jordan never got to hand the series on, although his wife chose Sanderson to finish it. Pokémon, on the other hand, is still going, still running that relay race, the torch being passed endlessly with the creator standing at the starting line. Pokémon is one of those constants that I've always had in my life, and without a doubt in the lives of millions of children, adults now too, right from the very beginning. I was born in 1995. The games first came out in 96, so I was primed and ready to absorb every damn second of it, like a good 90s kid. And I did. I got Blue on my 6th birthday, along with a white Game Boy Advance and Rayman. I dressed up as Squirtle, my Trudeau moment, and up until about 13 years old, Pokémon was my entire life. That's not to say I grew out of it, far from it. My best friend was Japanese. He lent me the Japanese version of Pearl as soon as it came out, and I went balls to the wall despite not knowing a lick of Nihongese. I still played every game as they released. I loved them all, but it wasn't the same obsession that I had as a kid. I'd collected the toys, cards, books, listened to Tubi and Master on repeat, watched the anime, Pokemania. My enjoyment was almost purely the games after that point, and honestly still is. We'll come back to that a little bit later though. Again, recently, the anime finished, Ash's one at least. He became champion of the world and went off on his endless adventures again. The good thing about the biggest franchise in the world is that it's going to keep going on as long as it makes money. It felt bittersweet though. I always imagined I'd die with Ash and Pikachu still on adventures, but honestly I'm kind of happy that it finished the way it did. Some closure. Robert Jordan didn't get that closure, but at least the Pokemon that I know did. Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokémon, is still alive and kicking as president of Game Freak. Not standing as the director of the games anymore, Junichi Masuda had taken the helm, with other directors pitching in intermittently as well after Pokémon Crystal. Masuda stood down too, however, putting Shigeru Omori in charge. He directed Pokémon Sun, which is my favorite Pokémon game, despite its flaws. Anyway, Satoshi Tajiri's vision came alive after a grueling 5 years of development. Although it's officially 6, the game got delayed after completion to release in the more favorable window of February 1996. The game did gangbusters, and although coming out on the aging Game Boy system, sparked a genre-defining revolution. Blue version was released through CoroCoro magazine later that year, fixing up a lot of the bugs that the original versions had shipped with. When it came to bringing Pokemon to the West, Blue was used as the template, and Red vs. Blue being the more typical color combination as opposed to Japan's Red and Green. Red and Blue were translated and brought over as part of a massive localization campaign by 4Kids and Nintendo of America, converting kids into collecting pocketable creatures. Gotta catch 'em all! Gotta catch 'em all! One of the key aspects for the success of Pokemon were Ken Sugimori's character designs. Something about his art style just vibes unbelievably hard, and while I still adore his current style, early Pokemon Sugimori is at his most powerful stylistically. Pokemon hit hard in America too. 4Kids CEO Al Kahn took a gamble, and it definitely paid off. By the time it released in the West though, Game Freak had been hard at work on other games in the series. The anime had been a success, and Pokemon 2, Gold and Silver versions had been in development alongside Pikachu's Surfing Simulator. The team was exhausted, some staff wanting the company to move on after the sequels were finished. Understandably, given that with the new Yellow version coming, they've been working on Kanto constantly for 8 years, and the new games are having their own troubled development cycles. That wouldn't happen though, with Pokemon being one of the best-selling games of all time at its release. At the 1997 Nintendo Space World Convention, Nintendo's Japanese trade show, the new and improved versions were shown off. The game's maps were based off the entire country of Japan. The first games are based just on the Kanto region, where Tokyo is. And for those wanting to move on, they plan to take the series out with a bang. These games would be huge. Unfortunately, the scale was cut back dramatically though. The games disappeared from public sight for almost 2 years after the Space World demo. The team weren't happy with what they'd done. In that time, Junichi Masuda stepped up to the plate, becoming the sub-director of the games, putting the focus on the Kansai region of Japan, which today is considered Japan's cultural capital. Pokémon Red and Green were focused on the original intent of the series, being based off of Satoshi Tajiri's childhood experiences of catching bugs, watching Ultraman, and his frustrations at grinding for items in Dragon Quest games, which his friends had managed to find in a fraction of the time. If you could trade things, then that would solve the problem of duplicates, which turned into trading Pokémon. The Game Boy Link cable accessory sparking that flame in Tajiri's soul. Tajiri had grown up in Tokyo in the 1970s, and while the city was still growing at an extreme rate, there were large pockets of nature, rivers and brooks, forests, farms, places where a young child could go and explore and enjoy being out in the world. By the time Pokémon had started development, Japan's bubble was high in the sky, and Tokyo was a bustling metropolis. Some of Kanto's designs reflect that, sporting industrially influenced Pokémon like Magnemite and Grimer, being tied closer to the human world than, say, a Pidgey. Johto, on the other hand, was a region built off of history and legends. The team had already developed designs for the new Pokémon that would appear in the game, but a lot of them were either retrofitted or deleted in favor of refocusing them to better fit Johto. Where the original games had their respective starter Pokémon featured as their game's mascots, Gold and Silver had theirs with Ho-Oh and Lugia in full focus. Both had made their debuts in the anime before the games had released. Ho-Oh in the first episode of the anime made as a teaser, with the team knowing full well that the sequel games were in development. Lugia was created for the second movie, then fitted into the games as Ho-Oh's counterpart. Although they managed to fit Lugia in fairly well with the story, the games feel built around Ho-Oh. Ecruteak City, based off of the real-life cultural capital of Kyoto, being the birthplace of the legendary trio Entei, Raikou, and Suicune, its secrets being held tight by the Kimono Sisters and priests of the Bell Tower. Lugia, on the other hand, still fits in well with the mythology of the region, being a leviathan that lays at the bottom of the Whirlpool Islands, based off of the real-life Naruto and Shikoku. Again, characters talk highly of the creature, though it doesn't hold that same level of reverence that Ho-Oh does, at least before the remakes Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Again, we'll go over those a little bit later. Johto is connected both geographically and culturally to Kanto deeper than any other region in the series. Though the Kanto that exists in Gold and Silver is a region set 2 years after the original games, Team Rocket are still the villains of the game, coming back from the first game in disarray after their boss abandoned them, with the admins trying to bring them back, staking their own claim to a whole new world. As an aside, I love how much Team Rocket grunts love doing crimes. Those guys are the happiest villains I've ever seen outside the Team Skull grunts. Many Pokemon from Kanto appear in the region, in most cases appearing far more than the new creatures. It's something that earned the games a lot of well-earned criticism. Gym leaders and trainers using Kanto Pokemon more than anything else. Despite that, they all have their memorable encounters, their aces being much better power representations of their types than in the Kanto games, at least in my opinion. The problem of the underuse of Johto Pokemon is a serious thing, though. Some new additions like Houndour and Misdreavus don't actually appear until the post-game. Youngsters usually use Rattata instead of Sentret and Hoothoots. Others like Dunsparce, Hoppip, and Yanma are all extremely rare in their respective areas, which makes it easy to go through the games without ever having known they existed. In general too, the Johto originals are far weaker than the Kanto Pokemon. Their movesets are often terrible, and even if you grind to level them up, they're just plain awful. I used Jumpluff in my run of Crystal, and as much as I loved it, I considered dropping it, though I stuck with it until the end because it's just so friend-shaped. Just look at it. All of the new Pokemon designs in the Johto games are just amazing, and fit in well with the region's locales, making their uselessness a big shame. Standler's based on Japanese deer, which are goddamn everywhere in Nara, the ancient capital. Design-wise, it looks similar to the deer god from Princess Mononoke, just without the creepy face. Yanma is a giant dragonfly. Japan was once known as the island of the dragonfly, Akitsushima. Dragonflies were thought to have protected children, so it's kinda nice to imagine Yanma being the most devout of the main character's team to keep the trainer from harm's way. The fantastic designs and lived-in feeling of the region really lend themselves to making the games feel like home to me. I know that every Pokemon game does that to an extent, but at least when it comes down to it, Johto's comfy as heck 90s Japan vibe is what does it. I used to feel the same about the remakes, though after playing them again for the video, there's something that didn't quite sit as well with me. In general, while the remakes are certainly better games, they went above and beyond with chucking in as many cool features as possible, and graphically it looks incredible, but there's not quite as much of that feeling of adventure, about what could be around the corner. Admittedly, this could be because I played Heart Gold immediately after finishing Crystal, and Voltorb Flip is the only thing that kept me sane, but I also think that in some ways, by adding too much and streamlining it a little too much, they took away some of the charm from the originals. Shigeki Morimoto, the director of the remakes, has been with the company since Mario & Wario in 1993. He had also directed Pokémon Emerald, which is also considered one of the most feature-packed games in the series. He hasn't directed any games since, however. Game Freak seems to give different long-time employees the chance to take the lead in different games. Takeshi Kawachimaru, the director of Platinum, had worked as a game designer since Ruby and Sapphire, only directing Platinum, then mostly working with the network features for future games. James Turner had been working on the franchise ever since Pokemon Colosseum, albeit at Genus Sonority, but became the art director for Pokemon Sword and Shield, also having directed one of Game Freak's non-Pokemon games, Tempo the Badass Elephant. James Turner happened to be one of those fans who loved the games when he was young and actually managed to work on them. Each director has their own visions and features they like to push. Although due to Pokemon being the monolithic figure it is, and the game's having a fairly quick development cycle nowadays, it's tough to say just how much influence the game directors have over the end product. Is it the executives up top that decide the course of action in the end? The anime, the TCG, the manga, every bit of merchandise revolves around the games being released. If the games are delayed, the monolith can't move. Game Freak is Sisyphus and Pokemon is the boulder. Pokemon is corporate incarnate, though that's not to say there's not still soul in there. People are the ones who are still creating it. Now we're in a position where kids who grew up with the games, people my age, are now making the games, and one day they'll be in charge. The vision of what makes a good Pokemon game will keep changing over and over until that torch burns out. There are still exciting things happening in the series though. I did enjoy Scarlet and Violet a whole bunch. I think the story and how it's all presented were incredible. Maybe the best in the series, in fact. It's the open world I can't get behind as much. Like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom for Zelda before it, I think it's a good start, and hopefully it'll get iterated on enough that it doesn't feel so barren anymore. Legends Arceus was just awesome. I was kind of dreading the release of it, but it turned into one of my favorites. The kind of barren open world fit a little bit better given the setting of going on expeditions in a new land, and having it split into Monster Hunter-like zones made those areas small enough that they could still fit in a lot of cool details. I'm not a huge fan of the battle system compared to the main series, but as a whole I really hope they continue the Legends series. That leaves a question now of where else the torch could go. Pokemon stands in that unfortunate position of being the face of its genre, meaning that there are dozens upon dozens of games that put their own spin on the idea of monster collecting. Some have done it extremely well. Dragon Quest Monsters is one of my favorite series of all time. The Dark Prince is coming out on December 1st. You tame monsters by feeding them meat in battle and fuse them to create new and more powerful creatures. This is my favorite sort of mechanic in monster games, but although Pokemon doesn't have that, breeding kind of makes up for that. Saying that, the game has some absolutely cancerous Day 1 DLC already on sale, and I think it's bad enough that I won't play it. Indie games like Koromon follow Pokemon's trail fairly closely, but with their own spin. In Koromon's case, however, it's pretty much as close as you'll get to a 2D Pokemon game in both gameplay and presentation. It's immaculate, and I can't recommend it enough. One that I haven't tried out though is Cassette Beasts, which by all accounts is a fantastic halfway point between monster combining and evolution mechanics, and something that I'm really keen to check out. Seeing how a series evolves and changes over time means that people get alienated from what they once loved about the series, but that also brings in new fans. It's an ebb and flow that also creates those indie games that try to replicate what they once loved in a game, passing one torch onto the other, creating a whole genre. It's not just one torch being passed in a franchise, but lots of little ones cascading off of every idea that sprouts from someone with inspiration. And that seems to be what Tajiri wanted. While I was recording this video, Did You Know Gaming released that video about Gold and Silver facts, and Tajiri had a wonderful quote in it. He says, "I'm thinking the best Pokemon game will be released sooner rather than later, but whether or not it'll be the best Pokemon game is something I can't achieve on my own. From here on out, kids who grew up playing may grow up to be game developers, right? And if those kids have the same vision as us, then I definitely think it'll be possible to expand the world of Pokemon by working together with them." So, no matter how long Pokemon lasts, and I hope it lasts a long time, there'll always be something new as long as someone was inspired by Satoshi Tajiri's dream. Warped as their ideas may be from the original, they're still derived from that same place. From that same place Robert Jordan's world came from. From that same place your ideas might come from. And that's all for today. I've finished my tea and it's getting late. I've been One Man Tea Party. Thanks for watching.